So I'm just going to get right to it. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Matt Carmichael, Chief Editor of What the Future. Matt, you have the floor.
This is DJ John Richards on WTF with Matt Carmichael, where the future matters.
Hey everybody, and welcome. I'm Matt Carmichael, the editor of What the Future and head of the Ipsos Trends and Foresight Lab. Now, there are those among my friends who would say that it's a little ironic that I work with a group related to trends. They would say I am maybe not the most trendy person, especially when it comes to fashion. And I'm certainly not as trendy as supermodel Bella Hadid, who showed up at Paris Fashion Week and had people spray on a dress that she wore. And this liquid that they sprayed turned into fabric within seconds, and it became an actual dress. And you should totally Google the video. It's far out and awesome. But I am very much on trend when it comes to a specific way that I buy things. In fact, I'm so on trend that I'm more like the Gen Zs and the millennials than I am my own Gen X. And that's because many of the stated purchase drivers and drivers of intent relate to things I care a lot about supporting small businesses, about shopping local, about things that are made in the US, and about sustainability. So my messenger bag is made by a small Chicago company. It's made using recycled materials and reused materials like military tarps and seat belts and bike tire inner tubes. And I've shaken the hand of the guy who owns the company as he sewed in a custom mod for me in the bag. In it, I carry US-made pens and US-made notebooks from another local company, Field Notes, one of my favorites. And this is the guy who made my watch. And I've met him and I picked it up at his house, which is just a couple miles from where I grew up. The clothes I'm wearing, the shirt, the jacket, they're all made in the US. The shirt and my jeans are made from a company just a couple miles down the road from me. And last time I was in New York, I took the subway down to American Giant and bought this jacket, which is a tiny supply chain. It's US made cotton, it's sewn in the US, so it's very sustainable and it's quality and it's gonna last forever and I'm gonna wear all the time. And shopping errands like that, they could be tedious, but they're less so when you're shopping with purpose. And so today, here's what I want you to think about and take away from the talk as we go. And that's that everything is shifting. What we buy, where we buy, why we buy it, if we can afford it, and how we pay for it. Today, we'll talk to experts in all those areas and dive into the data insights to talk about how you and your brands should prepare. At the moment, there's often what we call a say-do gap between what people say drives their purchases, like everything I just listed, and what they do, which is often buy a cheap hoodie that'll last a season and might well be made under less than ethical or sustainable conditions. But will that shift in the future? That's just one of the tensions we'll discuss as we go. So imagine it's 2031 and the reasons and the ways people spend are shifting due to forces like aging, technology, and climate change that are reshaping budgets and shopping options. Where will we spend our money? And what will that mix of physical versus virtual in our shopping? Who will be able to spend? And how will economic volatility impact people's spendings? In this issue, we tackle two aspects of the future of spending. Where we'll spend our money is one. What will be the mix of physical versus virtual in our future shopping? And the other part gets at who will be able to spend. A huge generational wealth transfer is coming. Or is it? Economic volatility and will matter to people's spending. Or will it? Privacy concerns will be a barrier to adoption curves. Or will they? And finally, we tackle the changing nature of discovery, which is kind of a third topic, or how we find products and services. Think of every movie that took place in the 80s or earlier. People hung out in malls, they strolled downtowns, They stopped in at the general store for a couple staple items and some gossip. But that's in the past. It's shifting, but it's not totally gone. The US is a $25 trillion beast of an economy. We're not going to solve all its problems. But hopefully, you'll get to the end of this issue, cock an eyebrow, scratch your chin, and as you read the scenarios, you'll say to yourself, I'd buy that. So, when we think about the future, and when we do that to produce what the future, we use a lot of the same tools that we would use in a traditional trends or foresight exercise. This is basically what futurists call a domain map. Our end product when we're doing this is a magazine that has to be very broadly and generally readable. And so we tend to practice within What the Future something we call editorial foresight, which is rooted in many of the same philosophies as traditional foresight. But again, our end product is somewhat different. We are not doing this to solve a specific problem for your specific business, although we can. We are doing this to create a magazine that lots and lots of people can read. So the question at the center is broad about the future of spending. If you were doing foresight engagement yourself, it would be much narrower. It would be something related to your business, a business challenge, a business question, something that's happening there. But when we're thinking about the future of spending broadly, we're thinking about the economy, these kind of macro things, economic cycles, historical cycles, systems, structures. We're thinking about demographics. How will migration change the way we spend? How will climate change fit into that, for instance? If we are living in changing climates, will we buy things differently? Apparel, air conditioning units, etc. We're thinking about technology, AR, VR, social commerce, e-commerce, how these things are driving changed behaviors in our spending. We're thinking about the retail environment in terms of brand purpose, in terms of physical stores, in terms of sustainability and the circular economy. We're thinking about privacy issues. How are those going to fit into the way we shop? And finally, we're thinking about globalization. Things like reshoring, we're thinking about things like nationalism, and we're thinking about, again, that made in the USA driver and how that is changing as well. And when we think about change, when we think about the future, we are always thinking about these kind of three things and how they relate to each other. On the left, we're thinking about the macro forces, the huge tectonic plates that drive change in the future. Those include things like climate change. They include things like systems, like systemic racism or systemic inequality. These things often unfold over large periods of time, although they can be accelerated by things like a global pandemic. On the right, we're thinking about the signals, the expressions of change, the things that we see in the news that have us thinking about the future. And that could just be a headline. It could be something interesting happening in the news. It could be a new patent. It could be a new regulation, some new invention. We as futurists see these things all the time from all these places, and we don't necessarily know they're going to mean something. We don't necessarily know what they're going to mean, but our spidey sense tells us they're going to mean something. And in the center, always at the heart of it all, are the humans. The shifts that we see in societies and markets and people. And in all our work, these are the things we think about. And that leads to our work in trends and in foresight and in developing what the future. And when we think about the macro forces, it's hard to think of anything more macro than the economy itself. So let's start there. Claudia Sham is a former Federal Reserve and White House economist. She's best known for creating the Sham Rule, which signals the start of a recession based on changes in the unemployment rate. She developed it to act as a trigger for distributing relief, such as stimulus checks during a recession, thereby taking the politics out of such decisions. Today, she consults and writes about economy, policy, and macroeconomics on her accessible and self-referential stay-at-home macro Substack. Just as the pandemic gave the healthcare sector hard lessons about preparing for global health shocks, Sham posits that the resulting economic crisis offers lessons for making the economy more resilient in the future. Crises in the supply chain, labor, energy, and housing markets collided with COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, exposing the structural weaknesses in the economy, says Sham. What will be important in the coming years is how we act on those lessons, she says. While the federal government has some tools and policies to support that preparation, businesses can and should also play a role. Here's what she told Kate MacArthur.
Federal government is not going to make all these solutions. The Fed has a very blunt tool. Businesses make a lot of decisions. They make the investments, they figure out how to structure, how they produce things, who they hire. They can really move the needle. It's the same thing about learning the lessons from this time. I would like them not to develop an inflationary mentality and try and, keep raising prices, but I won't do the Jimmy Carter and be like, don't raise prices.
Businesses can certainly do a lot, but we seem to also be hanging a lot of hope on individuals to make a collective difference in the economy. Because one generation is sitting on an enormous pile of the nation's wealth, and a lot is banking on what happens as that wealth shifts to other generations. One could argue in the past, people wanted to leave a better world for their kids, financially and otherwise. But there's some evidence that that's shifting. Ipsos research shows 14% of Americans age 55 and up say they don't expect to leave much to their heirs. Twice as many as those under age 54 say so. Ipsos Global Trends survey in 2021 showed that 4 in 10 Americans wished that they had grown up in their parents' era. And today, only 36% of Americans feel they'll be better off than their parents. This sentiment says much about our long-term financial opinions, as well as our prospects, says Annalise Slor, a research director in Ipsos Public Affairs practice. Anyone who's scrolled through Instagram or TikTok in recent years has probably discovered new brands or trends to try. Again, I'm wearing this awesome hoodie because of Instagram ads. Increasingly, however, fashionable shoppers are gravitating towards platforms like LTK, where style-minded influencers show off the hippest products found online. LTK now offers more than $3 billion in annual retail sales from 200,000 creators globally. General Manager Kit Ulrich says the app can bring new value and a human touch to online shopping. Creator-guided marketing can certainly make online shopping more fun, as LTK's 8 million monthly users would attest. But in Ulrich's view, influencers, whom she thinks of as real people shopping on your behalf, will also close the confidence gap created by e-commerce. For brands, an influencer can offer more authenticity, social currency, and personality than an ad campaign. But for shoppers, apps like LTK can provide frank assessments of clothing quality and fit, all without leaving the house, or the augmented reality app. This aligns with the goals between creators and the customer is key, she says, to making online shopping work in the future. And we're just getting started because of a dynamic my 11-year-olds are all too familiar with. Here's what she told WTF's Christopher Good.
I think what you're going to see is we're seeing the rise of creator-driven shopping. I think you're going to have a rise of many different types of creators, more than we've ever seen before. And you already see this with, younger generations saying that the job they want when they grow up is to be a creator or be an influencer. You did not have that a decade ago, and now you have that. And I think what that means is people are going to really learn to serve their shoppers in very niche ways, which I'm having a nod to, like authentic niche ways. I think creators are uniquely set up to do this in a positive way because they are incentivized to build the trust. Like if they, for example, sold you a product with an artificial review and then you buy it, you're not going to follow them anymore. And then they've hurt their business model. So it's a very rare dynamic that both sides win, meaning like they are incentivized to do exactly the right behaviors that helps create consumers gain the right trust.
Yeah. My 11-year-old, one of them, totally wants to grow up and be a YouTuber. It's a thing. How we find products and services and we want to buy is changing and will change. But even in younger generations, a large portion still want to buy items in store as opposed to online, especially in categories like food and furniture. Could that change as augmented reality and virtual reality offer the potential to take online shopping to new levels? Certainly. But we saw a trend in the pandemic that should give us pause. People would order groceries online for pickup at the store, but then go inside to pick up their own produce, says Amber Jawed, a senior vice president at Ipsos's SMX online communities practice. It leads to questions of where there are limits to virtual shopping, and if there are even any. Between physical spending and virtual world lives augmented reality. AR is already opening new frontiers for people to experience products and share those experiences with friends and followers. Doug Frisbee, Vice President of Global Business Marketing for Snap, sees myriad ways AR will make shopping seamless and, more importantly, make sharing those experiences all part of the fun. Shopping is active and often social as well. Traditional advertising is typically passive and often leads to delayed responses. AR opens a huge new world of opportunity for marketers to make an experience for shoppers that is more active, social, and in the moment, says Frisbee. He says that while HR might skew towards younger consumers today, research shows high levels of interest for older shoppers too. So while one might presume that these trends will be driven by youth, it's good to remember that older generations tend to have the money. So getting them on board will be critical to the short-term to near-term success. Frisbee doesn't think there will be much of an obstacle as one might think it is. Especially one might think it is an obstacle if one has met my mom. Here's what he told me when we talked.
I think it's less life stage dependent than you might think. Across generations, people really expect and anticipate to engage with AR, much more than they are today over the next several years. And I think one of the interesting insights is that older generations are actually even more likely to see the utility value of AR, maybe because they haven't experienced it as much as a social kind of fun way of interacting with their friends, but they really do see that potential for it to play a role in things like commerce from a more utilitarian perspective. And so we think it transcends generations and life stage.
VF Corp is home to brands like North Face, Timberland, Supreme, and Vans that are ubiquitous from ski slopes to skate parks. Dave Wagner, Executive Vice President of Venture Platforms, leads the company's entrepreneurial incubator and early-stage venture capital investments. His mission is to take the 123-year-old company into the future while staying true to the company's purpose around, quote, powering movements of sustainability and active lifestyles for the betterment of people and our planet. As economic instability and climate change increasingly drive shoppers to rethink their purchases, brands will play a critical role in those spending decisions. The success or failure of brands can come down to how they fit with consumers' values or even purpose, especially for discretionary brands like those VF sells, says Wagner. But purpose should be more than marketing copy or even employee engagement. It should drive how you innovate products and services. Here's what he told WTF's Kate MacArthur.
Innovation ultimately, in my opinion, is what delivers value. In order to maintain a consumer as one of your customers, you have to continue kind of raising the quality and the output of what you're doing to provide them with continuously more value, because you've got competition that's trying to do the same thing. So for me, the notion of purpose and why it matters is it channels your activity, and therefore what you bring forth in the product or in the experience that you're providing to the consumer, it makes total sense because it's consistent with the DNA of the brand from the beginning.
Innovation takes many forms, of course. Delivering on purpose and the customer expectation is important, but also faced with tensions. What will innovation look like when it runs into the tension between a desire for personalization and potential trade-offs for privacy. Globally, experiments and implementation using biometric technology in retail aim to ease checkout and customize products based on people's facial scans, fingerprints, or DNA. Of course, that comes with a trade-off in policy. People, especially women, report high levels of concern about several uses of biometrics today and potentially tomorrow. 3 in 4 Americans wish companies would do more to protect their privacy, and 7 in 10 would like to see more government regulation in the space. This is where user experience can make a difference. Making biometrics, from their collection to their use in the application, as seamless and non-intrusive as possible is part of the challenge, says Ying Wang, a director in Ipsos's UX practice. The other part is being as transparent as possible about how the data is stored. It's about the ability to choose. It's likely these technologies will grow in their usage, whether consumers like them or not. But making the benefits clear and the trade-offs as painless as possible could also speed adoption and acceptance. Even before the pandemic, recent supply chain woes, the current geopolitical instability, and rising tides of nationalism, Ipsos has been asking if we've reached peak globalism. While majorities in 25 countries surveyed support expanding trade, there's also strong support, 39% of the US, for putting more barriers and limits in place. As is often the case, humans can hold somewhat contradictory opinions, especially on complex issues like globalization. While Americans mostly agree that globalization is good for our country, we also see a rise in identity politics and nationality and party affiliation. Plus, we tend to think that local brands make better products than global brands. We see this giving rise to reshoring, the idea that we should be manufacturing closer to home to better control our supply chains. Buy American is among the strongest purpose-based drivers to purpose intent, according to our data. We will inevitably be a global economy for the foreseeable future. But in the US, brands can certainly differentiate with a broad base of customers by leaning into their US-based design and manufacturing capability, says Philip Ryan, a partner with Ipsos Strategy 3. Looking ahead, he says, identity politics may make this idea one step further. Expect to see some brands start to lean into the message of buy blue or buy red. Now, I talked earlier about some of the tools we use in our editorial foresight. And this is another tool we use to think about the future of things. It's called Future Jobs to be Done. Now, Jobs to be Done is a framework used to think about why we do things. And we don't buy something just to buy it. We hire it to do a job, to solve a problem for us. And so Trevor Sudano in our Strategy 3 practice and others have taken this idea into the future and created future jobs to be done. So for spending, we worked through some scenarios and we've come up with ideas of things that we will need to hire products or services to help us with in the future. One might be around managing cash flow, that in a future where entire lifestyles could be auto-financed by predictive algorithms that look at the lifelong value of each customer's likely productivity and the use of financial services products, we would need products to help project my lifetime earnings or help me compare my earnings to other people like me to learn ways to increase them. We might have jobs around helping me to get the best value every time, that we can imagine a world where anyone in a non-traditional or flexible schedule can reap the benefits of dynamic pricing by securing goods when they're at their least expensive. So we might develop tools and products that help us track price fluctuations over time, or help me sort through all of my purchase options and trade-offs and terms to find what works best for my situation. And third, we might need to figure out how to keep track of our own and all the things that we own. So we can imagine a world where digital wallet holds real world and digital inventory of all our worldly possessions, which can be used to buy or trade or sell and leverage. And we imagine jobs in that case where we're hiring products to help us validate ownership of our items or transfer that ownership. I think these are really interesting things to think about as we're innovating, as we're creating new things, thinking about these future worlds. Okay, the final tool we're going to talk about as we start to think about the future and start to think about the things that help us shape our thinking about the future is we think about the tensions, the things that will shift one way or another, the levers that will drive some of that change. And the cool thing about this is these are things we can measure today. We can get a baseline right now of where we are, where our opinions are on these different tension lines. And we can think about what happens as those start to change. And then over time, we can come back to some of these questions and measure them. Today, we're going to talk about 4 tensions that will drive the future of spending. Tension 1. Does the economy dictate budgets or not? Surprisingly, the income splits on this question aren't even significant. 57% says the broader economy does factor into how they spend their money, but 43% say it doesn't. Some have the means to be insulated from economic or supply chain flux. Others live tight to their budgets, which just 1 in 3 Americans set each month. But shoppers are only part of the equation. Claudia Sham, the economist, says it's businesses that are going to make sure supply chains are more resilient. They are the customers of the supply chain. But what if that economy had a greater or lesser impact? Or what if a generation of gradual price hikes and years of continued inflation and volatility make us more conscious of macroeconomics? What does spending look like then? Tension 2, augmented reality shopping or physical shopping? People are generally split today on whether AR has a future in shopping. But even if AR doesn't replace stores, it will likely, for lack of a better term, augment them. Part of its growing influence will have to do with what Snap's Doug Frisbee sees an important triad: the customer, the influencer, and the brand. Social and AR shopping experiences are built around the roles each of these factors play in the new ecosystem. And those roles become more defined and leveraged. It's plausible that more shoppers will see the value there. Frisbee says the inherently social aspects of AR and the ability to share those AR experiences with your friends that are coming from brands is an important source of influence as well. Tension 3, online versus the physical store. A 75-25 tension doesn't seem very tense. People still want to buy stuff in stores, and that will likely not change too dramatically in the coming years. But as we've seen over the past decades, if there's a diminished amount of in-person revenue, it changes what kinds of shops can survive in what places. Retail will continue to evolve, but so will other technologies. Both will fill consumer needs. LTK's Kit Aldrich says, when people used to walk around a mall, it was interesting, it was fun, but it was also social. You were usually with a group of people. I think that's still true, she says. We're just starting to do it in an online world. And our final tension: does where a product made matter or not? The desire to buy American is complex. It's a form of nostalgic pride that can take on different flavors and cross ideological divides. Or maybe it's just a belief that US-made products are higher quality. Ipsos data shows that as far as purpose-driven purchasing goes, American-made is a top driver. On a list that's more about price, quality, and standard consumer values, then it ranks a little less important. But just because price wins doesn't mean you should discount purpose. BF Corp's David Wagner says, the notion of purpose and why it matters is it channels your activity, and therefore what you bring forth in the product or in the experience you're providing to the customer. So how will the tension between globalism and nationalism shift this lever in the future? Well, let's think about that, and let's think about some futures. We're going to give you 2 scenarios, and we're going to talk about the difference between. So in port 1, in this world, economic inequality has gotten worse, if anything. People still buy stuff. They do it in stores, and that is still changing. Online shopping continues to grow. Delivery of goods continues to grow. Downtowns in many cities have mostly regained their daytime working populations. Some of the largest cities have adapted to a smaller daytime population by reviving the decade's trend toward increased downtown residential development. And that leads to a different retail and restaurant mix. But cities will always evolve and adapt to trends and shocks alike. The suburbs, however, have a harder time of it. Rising energy prices coupled with accelerating climate change is affecting how we spend individually and as a society. Now we need to pay for snowplows in Nashville, cooling systems in Seattle, and the pandemic pushed us towards outdoor living and entertaining. The climate is pulling back us inside. In this world, with its odd mix of convenience and uncertainty and inequality, how we spend will continue to shift. Money is following the people who wind up in the immersive experiences that are well-funded and growing. More people are using augmented reality, brands are playing in that space, people are spending there, virtual reality has taken off, brands are playing there too, and people are spending there as well. We're more used to buying virtual items, but we also want analog equivalents to show our real-world friends. So that's one very plausible set of things that could happen in the course of the next 5-10 years. Now, think back to our attention about people buying goods in stores versus people buying them online. Today, 75% of people say they will always shop for goods in stores, and that's likely true. But what goods will they buy and what will those stores look like? What if that majority shifts and only 65% of people say they will need stores? Physical retail has already been working to become more experiential. Online retail has been trying to become more social. And in this world, these trends continue and converge. And that leads us to port number 2. This is driven partially by our greater acceptance of digital and online shopping as the waypoints shift between and point us towards a future like this. But these AI assistants have a side effect. As brands can't compete on price to the same degree due to real-time algorithmic price changes, they must compete on other factors like purpose, quality, and availability. More and more product categories are commoditized, like actually commoditized. Futures markets evolve not just for grain and energy, but back-to-school supplies and holiday gifts as well. This helps retailers to stock appropriately, as does the rise in customized, locally produced goods housed more in warehouses than retail stores. Physical retail has also pivoted. Augmented reality displays not just pricing information, but also stock levels, information about the carbon footprint of the items on the rack, and stories about the workers who make it ethically. Stores allow you to take part in the manufacturing with 3D printed bespoke goods to your exact specs as you stream the experience to your social media followers. Mass market and scarcity continue to intertwine as luxury brands create FOMO-inducing limited edition digital items, but consumers continue to wise up to the realities of what constitutes scarce. Either of these scenarios are plausible places we could wind up, or likely some combination of elements from each of them. They're certainly plausible enough to cause us to need to prepare with your business and brand. Which brings us to the point I always try to leave us with. When you imagine possible tomorrows, you ask better questions today. The more you think about the future, the more you imagine where your brand, where your product, where your customer will be in 3, 5, 10 years. Whether that's through informal exercises like this, or ideally through a formalized trends and foresight process, the more you think about the future, the better work you'll do in innovation, in creative testing, in trying to figure out how to message and prepare your brand and your products for the future. And that's all we got today. I would love it if you subscribe to our free newsletter. Once a month, we'll send you an email inviting you to the new issue of What the Future. And it's easy. There's a nice handy QR code. You can also find it on our website with all the future archives at future.tech. future.ipsos.com. And I'd like to thank you very much for coming out to our Future of Spending webinar. I'll be back next month for our long-awaited Future of Work edition. So thanks very much for coming out. Again, I'm Matt Carmichael. You can reach me at matt.carmichael@ipsos.com. Find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And we'll be back next month again with the Future of Work. So until then, thanks, and we'll see you in the future.